Hello and welcome back to another video. In this week's episode we're going to take a look at another feature from a popular game. We're going to take a look at Tomb Raider and the interaction when you pick up a collectible object to take you to another screen and then investigate it a little bit. Let me show you what I mean. Let's have a look. So you're probably all quite familiar with what we're going to do here. You've probably seen it in some of your favourite games where you're running around the environment and you find like a collectible relic or an artifact, and then you click on that artifact and it takes you to like an investigation screen where you can examine it in more detail. I want to see how we can build this in Unity and show you some of the features that we can leverage in order to create this effect and interaction. So here we are, Unity is open. We're using 2020.3.12 F1. And also it's using just the standard 3D normal render pipeline. We're going to need to bring in our environment because we're not going to make that. We're going to use one that's already prepared for us, as well as the first person controller. So to get all that good stuff, we're going to go to the Asset Store tab and click on Search Online. That's going to open up in your browser. And then in Search for Assets, we're just going to look for the starter. And that should start populating the stuff below. We've got starter assets and we're looking for the starter assets first person character controller. Go ahead and click on that one. This is free and it's by Unity Technology, so we know we're all good. We're going to go ahead and click on add to my assets. Get a little notification to say it's added, and that's all good. So then we can go back to Unity, go back to our scene view. And we're going to window, package manager, and go where it says packages in project, change it to my assets. And then in the little search box, we're going to click on starter. Not click on, type in. And you'll see here we've got the asset we've just added, which is the starter assets first person character controller. Got to go ahead and download that and then import. And you'll get a little pop up asking you to import some stuff, and we're going to say yes and go ahead import. We then get a notification to say that this project is using the new input system. That's all good. Yes. Unity will then shut down and restart. So we can now go ahead and close that package manager. You get a little prompt saying, welcome to starter assets. You're my hero. So we'll click on now in the starter assets. Let's find the scene we're looking for. We'll click on the first person controller and then scenes, and then you can see you've got playground here. We'll go ahead and open that up, and this is awesome. This gives us a real good starting point for us to just dive right in and start playing around with some interactions. If I go ahead and hit play, you see here we've got a nice environment. You can walk around using traditional W, A, S and D keys, all the arrow keys, and we're looking around with our mouse. Awesome. So what we need to do now is find a way to interact with the world. Currently we can just walk around, but we want to be able to add the functionality that when we left click, we shoot a ray out into the scene. This is ray casting, and then whatever that ray hits, we need to determine if it's a collectible object or not. So we'll build up our ray cast functionality in the next bit. So let's take a look at how we can go ahead and do this ray cast. So we want to be able to run around our scene. This is our little player controller here, and traditionally what happens is we're going to raycast from the center of the camera, which is also the center of our view. So right in the middle of the screen is where we're going to raycast out in front of us and see what we hit. So to make this easy to visualize and also to understand what's going on, let's go ahead and click on the main camera in the scene, which is right here. And let's go ahead and right click and go to create empty. And we'll call this our raycast object. And I'll bring that forward. And let's bring outside the player here. So this is where we're going to shoot a ray from this point in space and go straight out in front of us. Now let's have a look at writing the script that's actually going to fire the ray when we press the left mouse button. So we'll go ahead, left click on our assets, go right click, create folder. Let's just call this one scripts. And inside here, let's create a new C# script, and we'll call this one simply raycaster. Then drag and drop that onto our raycast object. See here on our raycast objects, we have our raycaster. Let's double click it to open up in Visual Studio. Now, we want to keep our system as flexible as possible, and we want to also make sure that this raycaster class only does one specific job. And that job is going to be to cast a ray into the scene and report to a raycast manager on the object that it's hit. So all this is doing is just simply raycasting. So we need a couple of variables, and for the moment we're going to go ahead and delete the start and the update function. We don't need those. We don't want to click our left mouse button and have a ray shoot out into infinity, so we're going to have a float that controls how far that ray goes out into the scene. This is only going to be accessible by this class, so we can make it private. And to see it in the inspector, we're going to put serialized field, and it's of type float, and this is going to be our ray distance. We also then need to know which input action we're listening for, which is going to be our left mouse button, which we'll set up in a second. But we also need to specify what that input action reference is. So again, we'll go ahead and create another private variable, which is serialized, and we'll go ahead and put input action, and you'll see here it's not going to come up, and that is because we actually need to use a namespace. So we're going to go to the top, but using Unity Engine dot input systems. It's input system, and then we can get rid of that and start typing input action, and we want to look for the input action reference. Is this there? Go ahead and enter, and we'll call this our selection button. This is the button we press to shoot a ray out into the scene or to click on an object in front of us. Now, to keep our system flexible, we're going to pass our hit object out to a manager. We haven't made that yet. Just going to put in a space here, which is going to be a link to our raycast, and I'll explain why we're going to use a manager in a second. For the time being, we want to listen for when our button is pressed. So we're going to have to listen for an event on that button, and to do that we're going to use private void on enable, and we're going to say that we want to listen to our selection button, to that action when it's performed. So every time we've clicked our left mouse button, we've made a selection. So we'll make a method in a second called selection. And a nice shortcut here, you can go ahead and put your mouse over the top and go control and full stop, and it's going to say, you're going to get a list of things you can do, and we're going to generate a method raycaster selection. That puts it down there like so. We then need to use on disable to stop listening to that action, so we can say selection button dot action dot performed minus equals selection. We can go ahead and neaten this up by left clicking on the selection button, control full stop, and you get a little thing that says use expression body for methods. Just here, go ahead and hit enter, and it's going to put it all onto one line for us. Nice and neat, like so. So what happens when we've made a selection? So our left mouse button has been pressed. Well, let's perform a raycast. So we can say here, perform. I'm going to create a method called perform raycast. Now you could actually do the performing of the raycast all in this selection, but just for you to understand, I think it's a little bit easier to read about what's going on. We just create a method called perform raycast. And again, we can put all that all on one line by going control full stop. Generate that method, first of all, and then we can also go control full stop and use expression body for method. So we've hit our left mouse button and that's been detected. We're going to call our selection method, and that selection method goes, right, form a raycast. And this is where we are. We're in our perform raycast method. This is going to be really quick and simple. We're going to use an if statement. We're going to say physics dot raycast, and we're going to raycast it from our raycaster position, which we're already on that game object. So we can just say transform dot position, and then we need to give the ray a direction in which to shoot out, and which is going to be straight in front of us. We can say transform dot transform direction, and brackets vector free dot forward. So we're going to shoot that ray out in front of us. And then we want to store whatever we hit in a variable called hit, so out hit. And then we want to shoot that ray for as long as our ray distance is. We can set up in the inspector in a second. Yeah. Out hit. Go. Haven't specified what hit is yet, so we need to create a private variable up here, and this is going to be of the type raycast hit. This just stores the object that we've hit, and we'll call this hit, like so. Now we've got our variable there. Go ahead and finish off our if statement with some curly braces. And at this point, where we've performed the raycast, we want to pass this to our raycast manager, which we haven't written yet. We'll just go ahead here, put in a comment, pass it object to raycast manager. So why have I done this? Well, I thought about it for a while, and you can do everything you kind of want in here, but we want to keep our code clean, and this particular class has one specific purpose, and that's just to perform the raycast. By handing out what we've hit to a raycast manager, we can use the raycast manager to determine if we need to do anything special with the object. For instance, you might have collectibles in your game, which is cool. You can just pick them up and do whatever you want with those. But what about if the object that you've hit is a weapon and you want to pick up that weapon and do something different with that weapon? Or what about if you're picking up a health pack? You want to be able to pass the object that we've hit to the raycast manager for the raycast manager to then look at what type of object has been picked up and to do something special with it depending on what item it is. So that makes it simpler to break all that code out and just stick it in a manager and allow that manager class to handle all that. So just to check that our raycast manager is working, we can say debug.log, and we can just simply type in hit.transform.name. So whatever we hit when we press our left mouse button and shoots around into the scene, it's going to put in our console the name of the object that we've hit so we can see it's working. So this is the script for a moment. We will come back to this just to add in that link to the raycast manager, but this is the bulk of the work all done. You can see we've got some namespaces here that are slightly tinted, darker color. That's because we're not using them. We can go ahead and delete them and save. And then we can minimize that. And then back in Unity, it's going to compile that script. If you then go ahead and click on the raycast object, we'll see that we're able to set our ray distance. It's currently 0, so it's not going to shoot very far. So let's say we want to shoot out 5 meters in front of us. So the player has to be within 5 meters of the object for it to detect a hit. So go ahead and put 5. And then it wants a selection button. So we actually need to tell the system what button we're pressing in order to shoot the ray. And currently, let's see if we click on that, we only have player look, player move, player sprint. We're going to need to set up our left mouse button click. So let's have a look at that now. If we navigate down to our starter assets, you'll see there's a folder called input system. You go ahead and click on that. And then we want to open up the starter assets input action asset. This is going to open up a window. When you double click it, it looks a little bit like this. If you're not familiar with the new input system, this gives us the flexibility to specify a whole range of different actions and how they're triggered. And you can create action maps that have actions. So you can have different action maps with different actions if you want. We're going to keep ours simple and put it just in player for a second. So to add in an action, which is our left mouse button click, we're going to go ahead and click the plus. It's made a new action. And we can call this raycast. And we need to tell it that it's going to be a button, because we're clicking a button effectively, we're using our left mouse button. It doesn't have any binding yet, so we can create that by clicking on where it says no binding, going up to path, and we're going to look for our mouse and the left button and click on there. And we're going to say use in control scheme keyboard mouse. So we'll just go ahead and check that box. Then need to go ahead and click on Save Asset, like so. And if you wanted to use, if you had like a controller, as you can see, a lot of these previous ones are all set up with a gamepad as well. You could go ahead and click on the raycast. We can add another binding here. We can go add binding, go back on here, go to gamepad, and maybe we could say it's one of these buttons. But that's how you would go ahead and add in a new binding. For this tutorial, we're only going to be using a mouse, so I'm just going to get rid of that one. So we're all good to go. We've got our left mouse button all set up. So now we need to go back to our raycast object. Press the selection button, click on the little circle. We're going to go ahead and click on player raycast. That's what we just set up. Let's go ahead and give this a whirl. Let's jump in play mode. So let's jump into VR. It's our habit. And now we can walk forward. Hang on a minute. Let's just look at the ground a second. So if we look at the ground, click. See on our console bottom left it says ground. Look up at the wall. Click. Change the structure prefab. This object over here. As long as it's got a collider on, it will return that we've hit something. So our raycasting is working. See, it's every time we press our left mouse button, it's shooting a ray into the scene and returning what we're hitting in the console. Cool. It's kind of hard though to visualize where that ray point is. So we need a reticule, which is a little dot in the center of the screen, which I think will help us a little bit. So let's go ahead and create the reticule. So there are a couple of ways we can do a reticule. We could do it the canvas route. You could do it with like a quad in your view, an actual 3D object that had a shader on it that made sure it was drawn over the top of everything else. Because what you don't want to happen is go up to a wall and the reticule suddenly disappears into the wall. You always want it to be drawn on top. You could also use like a world space canvas inside, a bit like you just doing with the quad. It's just going to be a game object that sits in here. Or you can have like a HUD, which is a heads-up display, which the reticule is then part of. I'm going to go the HUD route. I'm going to right-click UI, and then we want a canvas, and we'll call this HUD. This is a screen space overlay canvas, and you can just say scale with screen size, 1920. 1080. We'll click there in our scene view, takes us out to that canvas. So this is our canvas, and then we can go ahead and add in a UI image, which will be smack bang in the center of our screen, and then we can scale that down, keep scaling, scaling, scaling. Look in the game view if you want. And this is our reticule right here. Reticule, give it a good name. Reticule. Still a little bit big. This is going to be personal preference, but let's make it 0.1. It's a teeny weeny reticule. Let's go ahead and test that out. Let's go ahead and hit play. So we're going to have our mouse active. Once you click in the scene, it goes away, and you're just kind of left with your player and your reticule, and then you can move around your scene. Or shift to move faster if you want. And then when you click on something, when you're within 5 meters, see in the console there, it returns the name of that object. So I was going to do like one big, massive, long video, but it probably would have been like too much to take in. And I think doing it in these little bite-sized chunks is going to help understand what's going on. So just as a quick recap, we've imported our starter assets with a first-person controller all ready to go, and that's all controlled through the scene that we opened up, and allowed us to get cracking with very little work. And then from there, we created our raycaster. So under our main camera, we've got a raycast object, which is every time we left click, it shoots a ray out into the scene to determine if we've hit anything. And then in our next lesson, we'll create the raycast manager and ask our raycast manager to determine what to do with that object, depending on what it is, because technically it could be anything. And it's good to keep your systems kind of open, and we don't want like separate raycasting for, say, health pickups, weapon pickups. So having one raycaster that raycasts, that's its job, and then it hands off to the raycast manager, which will determine what to do with the object that you've hit. So in the next lesson, we'll go ahead and take a look at adding in that, and then we also added in our little HUD with our reticule on so we know where we're aiming. Well, there we go, guys. That's part 1 done. In the next episode, we're going to go ahead and take a look at extending the functionality a little bit and improving what we've got. So I hope you liked the video, and if you found it useful, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video, that really helps me out. Thanks very much. See you in the next one.